You guys sitting in air-conditioned offices in Washington or on Wall Street keep saying that inflation has cooled down to around 2% or 3% or whatever. But you seem to forget that even if prices stop rising, they are never going back to 2020 levels. Just look at the actual statistics. Home prices are up 1%. Food prices have jumped more than 25%, while car insurance and childcare costs keep rising at double-digit rates year after year. Meanwhile, median household income has only increased by around 43% since 2017. That gap between turtle-speed income growth and rocket-speed expenses is tearing apart the budgets of nearly 80% of Americans. Don't blame it on people spending recklessly or not knowing how to manage their personal finances. This trap was laid by a fundamentally broken structural system. From a housing market that has turned into a gamble, to childcare costs that are more expensive than the wages earned from working, to the deceptive phenomenon of shrinkflation on every supermarket shelf, and the so-called ghost postings in the labor market. It spares no one, from ordinary workers to those who once took pride in earning six-figure incomes. When financial breathing room is squeezed until there is nowhere left to turn, staying afloat in the middle class turns out to be nothing more than a relentless grind to pay back the system. Work hard, hustle, change jobs, earn a few more certifications, get a higher salary, and life will automatically get better. It sounds reasonable, exactly like the classic American dream. The problem is that this linear theory somehow became completely broken somewhere along the way. According to the statistics, wages this year are growing steadily at somewhere around 3% to 4%. On the surface, it seems like the economic machine is still moving forward. But the harsh reality is that while so-called nominal income inches upward at a snail's pace, the expenses you absolutely have to pay every week and every month are skyrocketing by 15% to 40%. Housing, insurance, healthcare, utilities, you name it. The macroeconomic reports on television keep repeating that the economy is stable and inflation has cooled, but the reality inside your bank account is telling a completely different story. Take a hard look at your paycheck and see where you're actually stuck. Most of us fall into the psychological trap of looking at the gross income listed on our contracts. You just celebrated because you got a raise of around $300 a month. Sounds impressive, but then the rent bill jumps up another notch. Car insurance companies like Progressive or State Farm send you letters raising their premiums. Buying a few essential items at Walmart or Kroger eats up quite a bit more. And on top of that, this month's electricity bill from Duke Energy has ballooned. Do the math over and over, and that sweet little raise has completely evaporated before you even realize it, sometimes not even enough to cover the shortfall. You're still standing in the exact same place on the financial treadmill, drenched in sweat but not moving forward an inch. That's precisely why the concept of gross income doesn't mean a damn thing anymore. What determines whether you can finally breathe a sigh of relief is your actual disposable income after every fixed obligation has been fully deducted. As unavoidable expenses continue to expand, your financial safety margin gets squeezed until it is as thin as a sheet of paper. All it takes is one small market shock or an unexpected bill to throw your entire month into turmoil. You work harder, earn more numbers on paper, but in the end, you find yourself more vulnerable and financially insecure than at any other point before. There was a time when the figure of $100,000 a year felt like a ticket into the club of prosperity and peace of mind. It was the milestone that, once you reached it, you believed you would no longer have to squint at your account balance or think twice about every dollar when paying the bills. Yet the harsh reality today is slapping that belief right in the face. According to recent economic reports and financial surveys, nearly half of people earning six-figure incomes are also struggling to make it from one paycheck to the next, wondering where all their money has gone. Take a real-life example that is by no means uncommon: a worker earning around $114,000 a year. On paper, or in the eyes of friends, that is an enviable income. But when you sit down with a financial advisor and break down the fixed monthly expenses, including rent, insurance, car payments, childcare costs, or student debt from college, the total amount that has to be paid before you even think about buying a bag of groceries or covering an unexpected expense has already eaten up around $91,000 a year. That leaves less than $2,000 a month to cover all of the family's living expenses. Looking at that spreadsheet, the question that comes to mind is not what to spend money on for a more luxurious lifestyle, but how can someone have that much money and still feel like they are standing on the edge of a cliff? The consequence of this reality is that the middle and upper middle income class is beginning to experience a level of instability they have never felt before. They are not poor by traditional definitions, but their financial security has somehow evaporated. The margin of these households is unbelievably thin. They are only one financial disaster or unexpected expense away, whether it is a car repair bill, an emergency trip to the clinic, or a sudden insurance premium increase. You work yourself to the bone to climb higher up the ladder, only to realize that the rung you have reached is actually just a gold-plated tattered mat, ready to tear at any moment under the weight of unavoidable expenses. Housing was once considered the cornerstone of the so-called American dream, a peaceful refuge after decades of backbreaking labor and a solid asset to build wealth for retirement. Yet the home that was once a place to settle down and build a life may have turned into a gigantic money-eating machine, waiting to drain the last of your savings. Look at the dry statistics from the real estate market, and you will see a gap so unreasonable that it is almost bitterly ironic. Since 2017, while median household income appears to have increased by only around 43%, home prices nationwide have skyrocketed by 81%, while rents charged by major apartment management companies have climbed by more than 50%. One side is lumbering along like a turtle, while the other is shooting upward like a SpaceX rocket, yet economic experts on television still casually expect you to somehow reach it. The reason behind this cruel joke turns out to be no secret. The United States has been suffering from a severe shortage of affordable housing that has persisted from the 2008 crisis all the way to the present, while major developers have focused on building upscale communities instead of affordable housing. On top of that, the Federal Reserve's mortgage rate adjustments have driven borrowing costs sky high, turning the purchase of a modestly sized home into a risky financial gamble. A house that once seemed affordable with a 3% mortgage rate suddenly becomes painfully expensive when rates jump to 6% or 7%. And even if you are lucky enough to get the keys to your new home, you still have to face an alliance of additional costs waiting to surround you. Soaring property taxes, homeowners insurance from major companies like State Farm or Allstate repeatedly sending premium increase notices due to weather-related risks, and maintenance and repair costs that are always twice as expensive as you expected. The facade of property ownership can sometimes take the form of financial handcuffs, chaining you to debts that stretch on for decades. The direct consequences of this cost game are painting a rather bleak reality for today's younger generation. Most of our children and grandchildren seem to have to put their dreams of living independently on hold, accepting the reality of moving back in with family or staying in cramped rental housing for far longer than previous generations did. Those who try to enter the market early are more likely to fall into the trap of long-term debt, where most of their monthly income obediently flows straight into the bank's account. You work yourself to the bone for your entire life to buy a small piece of land, only to sometimes wonder whether you actually own the house, or whether the house itself has come to hold power over your entire life. Looking at the reality of childcare costs today, one cannot help but wonder whether the United States is unintentionally punishing those who dare to take on the responsibility of building the country's future. At reputable centers and private preschools scattered from the East Coast to the West Coast, annual childcare fees now seem to have reached anywhere from $10,000 to nearly $20,000 per child, depending on which metropolitan area you live in. Just do the math. If there are 2 or 3 young children in the household who are still growing, the total amount spent on childcare can consume almost the entire income from one spouse working a full-time, 40-hour-a-week job. Before anyone can even think about making a profit, these facilities already have to shoulder an enormous pile of expenses. The childcare industry requires extremely strict staff-to-child ratios to ensure safety in accordance with each state's legal standards. On top of that, they have to bear all kinds of compliance costs, from operating licenses and expensive liability insurance bills to paying trained childcare workers, at least the minimum wage. While the public school system still receives government funding, the preschool and daycare stages are largely left to float under the so-called free market mechanism, with a complete lack of large-scale government subsidies. The result is a system in which it seems that no one is truly comfortable. Parents struggle to figure out where the money will come from, while childcare workers remain stuck with painfully low incomes. This vicious cycle will not spare the middle class. Just imagine a worker leaving home early in the morning, grinding away for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, only to realize at the end of the month that the money they earned is less than what they have to pay for childcare. Working full-time turns out not to be about generating a surplus for savings, but simply an act of covering the shortfall. What hurts even more is that this burden seems to fall squarely on the middle class, people whose incomes are not low enough to qualify for public assistance programs from the state, but who are not wealthy enough to casually spend thousands of dollars a month without blinking. That vicious financial trap is forcing families to make decisions that completely reshape the structure of their lives. Quite a few couples reluctantly have one person, usually the lower earner, give up their career entirely to stay home as a homemaker, because staying home to care for the children turns out to be less expensive than continuing to work. Many others choose to delay having children or drastically cut back on other long-term savings goals for retirement. You work diligently your entire life believing that your efforts will bring you a comfortable life, only to realize that even raising the next generation can become a luxury beyond your reach. Looking at the car market right now, we have to ask, what exactly has turned an ordinary means of transportation into a luxury asset almost as valuable as a bar of gold? The shock of car prices since the pandemic still shows no sign of stopping. The global supply chain disruptions and semiconductor shortages that once drained supplies of both new and used vehicles have now left behind a financial aftertaste that continues to this day. Practical family vehicles, such as a minivan or a 5 to 7-year-old SUV that has already been on the road for years, are still being listed by dealers at staggering prices ranging from $38,000 to nearly $50,000, despite having a huge number of miles on the odometer. You stand there looking at that beat-up old vehicle and feel as if you are about to sign a contract to buy a tiny apartment. And that's not all. If you manage to get past the initial shock of the sticker price, you quickly fall into a double trap of loan interest and ongoing ownership costs. Even when vehicle prices occasionally appear to stabilize on paper, the actual financing costs continue to weigh heavily on you because of the Federal Reserve's repeated interest rate adjustments. The result? Monthly payments on a new car loan have been pushed to record highs, ranging from around $700 to more than $730 per month. More painfully, buying the car turns out to be only the beginning of a chain of unavoidable hidden costs. You will have to continue shouldering skyrocketing auto insurance bills with double-digit increases in most states from major insurers such as Progressive or Geico, not to mention volatile gas prices, vehicle registration fees, and expensive repair bills every time you take the car to a local repair shop. The bitterest part of this story lies in the structural nature of America's transportation infrastructure, where a car has never been merely a luxurious convenience or a toy, but is essentially a necessity for maintaining one's livelihood. Except for a handful of major cities with reasonably functional subway systems, most life in this country's suburbs and mid-sized cities is tightly tied to four wheels. Cars are not used for leisurely drives or sightseeing. They are the only lifeline connecting you to your livelihood, allowing you to get to work, take your children to school, go to the doctor's office, or shop for groceries at supermarkets like Walmart. Losing a reliable means of transportation means the entire family's source of income could be disrupted immediately. You have no real alternative, and the system seems to know that perfectly well. This very dilemma is pushing workers toward risky temporary solutions. Many are forced to grit their teeth and extend their auto loans to 72 or even 84 months, or desperately keep patching up aging, deteriorating vehicles to reduce immediate financial pressure, even though everyone understands that this only makes the total long-term cost grow even larger. The feeling of owning a vehicle that supports everyday life is now gradually morphing into a form of long-term debt management and continuous damage control. You work yourself to the bone every day to keep the car running, only to realize that the car itself is what is swallowing up most of your family's already razor-thin financial margin. You may have felt hesitant yourself every time you push a shopping cart into the familiar aisles of major supermarkets like Walmart, Kroger, or Costco, wondering when exactly buying a few essential items for the family dinner started to feel like such an expensive transaction. Looking at the actual statistics, the so-called food price storm seems to be more than just a rumor on financial news broadcasts. According to the data, the prices of food purchased for consumption at home have climbed by more than 25% in total since 2020, delivering a devastating blow to the basic living budgets of households that were already struggling. And the biggest irony is that, unlike rent or insurance payments that can sometimes be postponed from month to month, grocery shopping is an unavoidable cycle. Once a week, you have to face another small psychological ordeal as you watch the total on the checkout bill grow larger and larger, with shopping carts that seem to contain less than before, while the total can easily exceed $150 to $200 for just a few basic items. But it does not stop there. Your shopping experience also seems to be distorted by a sophisticated tactic called shrinkflation, the phenomenon of reducing the size of a product while keeping the selling price the same or even increasing it. Major food manufacturers such as General Mills, PepsiCo, and Kraft Heinz seem to know exactly how to test consumers' patience as they quietly cut down the volume or weight of their products. A carton of ice cream that once came in the standard 4-8-ounce size quietly drops to 32 ounces, or packages of toilet paper and boxes of cereal contain a few percent less product, while the price tag on the shelf remains unchanged or creeps up by around 5% to 10%. On the surface, the price tag appears to have been kept in check to deceive the eye, but market analyses indicate that consumers are actually paying 10% to 30% more per unit of actual weight. That feeling of being manipulated right there on the familiar store shelves may be the very thing quietly eroding the trust of anyone who once believed they understood how the market worked. This squeeze has forced the middle class to completely change its consumption habits in a way that is hardly enjoyable. You can clearly see people beginning to remove high-quality fresh foods, beef, and fresh seafood from their everyday shopping carts, making room instead for cheap starchy or canned foods to stretch their budgets further. Declining purchasing power has also created a clear shift from familiar brands to supermarkets' private label products simply to save every last penny. Even according to recent surveys on consumer spending, around 60% to 70% of households have had to drastically cut back on the habit of stopping by fast food restaurants or traditional restaurants. A meal at home no longer represents a space for togetherness and enjoying life. It has become a carefully calculated and exhausting survival choice. You may have seen, or even experienced firsthand, the ghost posting practice that has become widespread recently. Companies competing to post fake job openings on platforms like LinkedIn or Indeed, even though they have no actual need to hire anyone. Why do they do it? Simply to polish their image, reassure shareholders that the company is experiencing explosive growth, or subtly create psychological pressure on current employees to obediently keep their mouths shut and work harder for the same old salary because they are afraid of losing their positions tomorrow. And that's not all. If you think that years of loyalty can earn you a ticket to safety, waves of mass layoffs from major corporations seem ready to slap that naive belief right in the face at any moment. From major technology companies to traditional retail corporations, companies are willing to launch massive rounds of layoffs even during quarters with huge profits, simply to make their financial reports look better and push stock prices up a few more points for Wall Street investors. The so-called job security that previous generations once considered the foundation of middle-class life may now be nothing more than an expensive luxury of the past. You devote an entire decade to an organization, only to realize that you are just a number that can be erased from the payroll on some gloomy Friday afternoon. Pushed out of the traditional safe zone, the workforce then falls into another trap: the explosion of precarious forms of employment and the absurd stagnation of wage policy itself. Instead of permanent positions with full benefits, people are increasingly being pushed into part-time jobs or short-term contract positions in the gig economy, completely devoid of health insurance or 401k retirement benefits. Ironically, while every living expense, from utility bills to insurance, is skyrocketing, the federal minimum wage remains stubbornly stuck at $7.25 an hour, year after year, without moving an inch. You work harder, take on extra side jobs, or struggle to switch jobs constantly just to keep your financial boat from sinking, but the feeling of instability and uncertainty seems never to let you go. Today's labor market seems to have turned into a one-way playing field, where workers' bargaining power is completely squeezed out to make room for the maximum interests of large corporate employers. The K-shaped economic model that economists keep going on about on television turns out to be a brutal blow to the vast majority of workers. Look at reality, and you will clearly see the growing divide between the rich and the poor tearing this society in two. On one side are the wealthy, those who hold shares in major corporations or own multiple properties, continuing to prosper as their assets generate more money amid the asset inflation boom. On the other side is the majority of workers who depend solely on their meager monthly paychecks and are sinking deeper into the quicksand of rising prices. Nominal wages inch upward by a few percentage points at a snail's pace, while the actual cost of living keeps skyrocketing. This distortion is not limited to personal bank accounts. It is tearing apart small communities as well. Look around local towns, and you will see family-owned shops and small businesses, the very people who once gave these communities their soul, closing down one after another. Where is the money supposed to come from to keep them running when customers' wallets have already been emptied after paying rent, insurance to major companies, and gas bills? The ruthless pressure from retail giants like Walmart and Amazon is leaving traditional neighborhood stores with no choice but to sadly pull down their shutters, leaving behind empty storefronts and bleak shopping districts. People's frustration keeps growing, not because they are lazy, but because the fabricated promise of fairness feels like it has betrayed them. You keep dutifully paying taxes every year, but what do you get in return? An overwhelmed healthcare system, underfunded public schools, and roads so full of potholes they look like plowed fields. Meanwhile, politicians and elites in Washington sit high above it all, casually declaring that the economy is booming and strong on paper. That shameless disconnect from reality is precisely the smoldering fuse, fueling a wave of anger among the middle-class people who are beginning to ask themselves what the hell they are working so hard for when this system seems to serve only the interests of a handful of elites at the top of the pyramid. In short, what we are witnessing is by no means a short-term bout of inflation or a minor stumble that will simply pass with the economic cycle. This is a fundamental and profound structural shift that is reshaping the entire economic life of the United States. As the middle class becomes increasingly squeezed and the financial independence of hard-working people is gradually stripped away with every bill, the stable foundation of an entire society is clearly beginning to crack from within. Understanding the true nature of these numbers and this cost game may well be the first step toward equipping yourself with a shield against the unpredictable changes ahead. Protecting your personal financial security is not simply a matter of cutting and stretching expenses from week to week. It is, in reality, the key to safeguarding your future and maintaining the independence of you and your family. What do you think about these financial pressures? And have you taken any steps to prepare yourself for this harsh reality? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next practical economic analyses.